Welcome. This is your short course on technology-supported collaboration. I'm Joe Constan, IRL's Associate Director for Information Technology and the person behind the design of your IRL portal. I have with me Gary Olson, Bren Professor at the University of California, Irvine, and a world expert on remote collaboration who has agreed to join us. He's actually a proud alum of the University of Minnesota, so it wasn't hard to invite him back, but has agreed to join us to take us through some of the lessons learned through success and sometimes painfully through failure about what makes a successful collaboration. The objectives for this short course are for you to understand the factors that lead to success and failure of heterogeneous and distributed teams, understand how communication and technology can facilitate collaboration and success, and then develop two specific things. You're going to conduct a team-specific assessment of the priority areas that you want to address for your team in a collaboration plan, and then develop a team-specific plan for technology-supported collaboration and more generally collaboration across the members of your team, however close or distant they may be. So when you're done, you should have a plan that helps you be one of the success stories rather than one of the failures we learn from. So a quick outline and then we're going to jump in. We're doing this in 10 lectures. The first 5 lectures, roughly speaking, talk about the challenges and risks. This one will start with understanding the idea that physical distance matters. We'll then talk about intellectual distance, factors that lead to success, and some examples of successes and failures. And we'll conclude the first half of this course with an assignment around analyzing risk factors for your own team using a technology known as the Collaboration Wizard. We'll then come back in the second half and talk about tools and best practices, technology support for remote collaboration, the social dimension, including looking at how you create the agreements and the expectations within your team, bridging gaps and building common ground, project management and relationship management, and that section will end with writing your own communication covenant, your own plan for how you're going to work as a team as you move forward, first into your proposals and then through carrying out your research. So with that, I want to start by turning to Gary, who was author with Judy Olson of this seminal paper, Distance Matters, and ask perhaps the key question to start with, which is, how does distance affect collaboration?
Well, it affects collaboration in very large ways. It turns out that there's been a whole series of studies done, started going back into the 1960s and 70s, often done in industry, that have shown that the likelihood of working with colleagues goes down almost geometrically by distance, and it asymptotes at about 30 meters. So when you talk about distance, we're talking about even modest distances. In sort of practical terms, you know, collaborators who are in the same hallway, have offices nearby, are much more likely to collaborate effectively than people who are on different floors of the same building, different buildings on the same campus, let alone, you know, in different cities or even different neighborhoods in the same city. So it's a real challenge. And there was a really interesting study done back in the earlier in this decade of large collaborative projects funded by the National Science Foundation. This was done by Jonathan Cummings and Sarah Kiesler. And what they found was that the measure of success in those cases was that I was actually one of the PIs that was investigated in that case. The measure of success was just asking people, do you think this project has succeeded? And when you looked at these measures of subjective success, those projects that were where all the principals were co-located were much more likely to be successful than those that were at a distance, that involved collaborators even in different buildings on the same campus. So it's a real challenge. And As I say, 30 meters, you think that's like 100 feet or 100 yards. Excuse me, about 100 feet, yeah. It's a very modest distance. It's like a third of a football field. And yet that is enough to really dramatically affect how likely you are to work with somebody and how likely it is going to succeed.
So, I mean, certainly I've noticed this, you've probably noticed this. I just run into people who are on the other floors of my building much less often. And if they had known about this well when they designed our building, we would have all been on one floor and the other departments would have been on different floors rather than having us have vertical spaces that were laid out that way. But
Well, it's interesting that there have been a lot of architectural attempts to do something about this. There's a famous example, Steelcase, a large furniture company, they built a pyramid for their research operation in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And knowing that people would be on different floors, to facilitate collaboration, they put the mail rooms and coffee pots and so on halfway between floors, thinking people have to go up to get it or down to get it, thinking that would help with this, and it didn't work at all. So, there even attempts to architecturally do something about this are really a big challenge.
So there's two things I've seen people talk about doing in academia and in industry. I'm curious if these are things that are well grounded in the research. On the industry side, I've seen a lot of these distance projects start with a face-to-face kickoff meeting. Their argument is, well, if you get to know each other and build trust, you'll be effective at a distance. Is that something that research seems to suggest is effective at helping bridge distance, or?
Yes.
So.
We did a lot of work with the auto industry when we were at the University of Michigan earlier in our career. And at least Ford in particular had a lot of very distributed engineering projects, and they would start with a kickoff meeting, sometimes lasting a week or two, where they brought everybody together in Dearborn, and then these were projects that would run for like multiple years, and so they had the intuition that they should do this every so often. So like every 6 months they'd get together, and so on. And we found that to be very effective compared to teams that never did that at all. They wanted us to answer the question, how much of this should they do? And that, as far as I know, it hasn't been researched in great detail. But it really is clear that getting together occasionally when you're a distributed project can matter a lot.
Well, and certainly for the teams that we have, which are mostly in the same city, they have the capability of saying every week or 2 weeks we'll get together physically.
Yep.
The other thing I've seen is, and this is something I know our university does with some projects, is they'll create a common space, not where anybody has their offices, and say, here's a common space for your project where when you want to meet, you can all work in this space. You can have computers, you can do other things. Does that seem to be well-founded as a way to help bridge these ideas?
Right, and a lot of the kind of places like Silicon Valley and other places that have large clusters of companies where people might have projects together, this idea of having flexible common space like that has been really taken off, and I think it's very effective.
So that's something that some of our teams may,
Yeah.
I mean, actually I know some of them proposed that as part of their applications, that there would be a place where everyone could come together, but others may want to consider that as they move forward. Well, I know that you have put together sort of your current best knowledge on this in a book, and maybe you could tell us just a little bit about that before we bring this lecture to a close.
Yeah, well, you alluded earlier to the paper we wrote back in the year 2000 on Distance Matters, which is kind of a review of where things stood at that point. And then we felt a couple of years ago we should try to bring that up to date. So this monograph, Working Together Apart, is exactly that. It brings up the whole Distance Matters story up to date as of the year 2014. And goes into some depth about the various factors involved in differentiating successful from unsuccessful projects. And so I think it's a nice summary of where we stand right now.
Well, I would agree. I actually used that as my reference for structuring this course and series of discussions with you. So what we can take away from this is we have a challenge. All of our teams are dealing with a distance of greater than 30 meters. In some cases, that distance is mere blocks. In some cases, it's across a city. In some cases, our teams are further distributed than that. And we're going to have to do something to address that. So stay tuned for our next lecture, where we're going to talk about the other side of this, intellectual distance, the challenge of interdisciplinary collaboration. This has been Lecture 1, our Introduction and Challenge in Technology-Supported Collaboration.